Kids love crabs, and for good reason too. Crabs really are one of the funniest invertebrates on planet Earth. They're funny because they walk sideways and they have their mouths are surrounded by all these little fingers. And of course their eyes are on the ends of stalks. I have 3 species of crabs that live in my backyard, and 8-year-old me thinks this is the biggest accomplishment that I could have ever made. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about this crab right here and his giant front claw. This is one of the crabs that lives in my backyard, and it's called a fiddler crab. I also know that this is a male fiddler crab because it's only the males that have that one characteristic giant claw. The females just have 2 small claws. This huge claw is used for fighting and for intimidating other males of the same species of crab. And their goal is to chase all the other males out of a territory and gain mating rights with the females that are in that territory. It really seems to be a bit cumbersome though. It's too big to use it as an eating tool. They can only feed themselves with the small claw. This claw just isn't that practical. It's huge, it probably bumps into things, it's heavy so it slows him down. It's definitely a burden. So why have such a large claw? Well, at the high school biology level, we can learn that it's because females find the claw attractive. So the bigger the claw, the more attractive the male is to a female. So the biggest claw male mates with the female, and that big claw gene gets passed along into the next generation. And the next generation is also going to have big claws or even bigger claws. This is called sexual selection, and it pops up everywhere in nature. When we learn the phrase survival of the fittest, we often think of the fittest as being the fastest, the strongest, or the most resilient. But sometimes it's literally just who's sexiest based on a single trait. So in sexual selection, the male with the biggest, whatever it is, wins. And he gets access to all the females in his territory. When there's a visible difference between the males and females of a certain species, it's called sexual dimorphism. And usually, if you see sexual dimorphism in an animal, there's almost always going to be some sort of sexual selection at play. Interestingly, if you look around the animal kingdom and you find animals where the male and the female look exactly the same, these species are usually monogamous. You can think of penguins, birds of prey, beavers, wolves, swans, seahorses, flamingos, and even the termites. So here's a peacock. Males have these beautiful long tails that they display for anybody who's around. Females base their mate selection on the largest and fullest tails displayed by the males. Now here's the thing about sexual selection that is bananas when you think about it. When I look at that tail, I can't help but think of what a burden it really must be. This thing is heavy. It definitely slows the bird down and hinders its flight. So it seems to me that a tiger or another predator would have a pretty easy time grabbing the peacock by the tail while it tries to flee. So if survival is hard and females are attracted to big tails as a measure for good genes, it may just be that the peacock is demonstrating that its genes are so good that it can handicap itself and still survive in spite of it. In this case, the largest tail really might be a good proxy for fittest individual. What we don't know. So I mentioned that when a species does not have a sexual dimorphism, that it tends to be a species that mates for life or is monogamous. So where does that leave humans? We definitely have secondary sex characteristics that arise at puberty, and these are sexually dimorphic traits. I'm thinking facial hair, vocal register, more musculature, and even skeletal differences. People who study human evolutionary biology tell us that humans definitely were not exclusively monogamous in our ancient history. Science does not yet agree on the sexual dimorphism of our most closest relatives, or most recent relatives, the Neanderthals. Some scientists say they're more sexually dimorphic, some scientists say they're less sexually dimorphic than modern humans. And this is partly just because we don't have enough information yet. We don't have enough skeletons that were excavated at the same site that were definitely male or female. So as archaeology goes along and we find new sites to dig, hopefully that'll settle this debate on the sexual dimorphism of the Neanderthals. One thing that I like to think about is that there has to be a point when your tail or your claw is too big and impractical to aid in your survival. So you're going to have this interesting interplay in between natural selection, which is saying that tail is too big and it's going to get you eaten, and sexual selection, which says we have to have the biggest tail possible because otherwise we're not going to find any mates. So finally, what we observe in the fiddler crabs or in the peacocks is a tail or a claw that is just big enough, and it's in balance in between these two selection pressures.